folks. So I'm Michael McMahon. I'm a software developer at Options IT. We service a lot of capital markets firms. But today I'm going to be talking about AI in the real world, everything from vibe coding to production systems and the differences that have been created. So we're now in a new era of technology, the era where anyone who has an idea can take that idea in whatever language they speak and turn it into a full working prototype in minutes, which used to take weeks to months and also years of learning a language line by line, letter by letter, to figure out just the syntax of it all. Now, this has created something where we have a very fast iteration, which obviously, as a lot of people have talked about today, exposes a lot of security problems, but also allows people to make something way faster than has ever been possible before, and in the easiest interface, which is just communication. It also has the lowest barrier of entry of this type of technology. I mean, a lot of the developers in this room at some point in their life would have had to figure out that JavaScript thinks that 1 + 1 is 11, and that's no longer something that is a learning gap that people have to spend weeks figuring out. So AI is brilliant at a lot of things, but it really excels in structured tasks, things like boilerplate generation for just setting up your config of your project, as well as just tests, making sure your functions work, and just debugging status codes that are pretty common. But also something that I've found a lot of benefit in is documentation, because I always like to write the code, but I never like to write the thing that explained that the code worked. So the only problem is that it's not perfect. It breaks down a lot on system architecture. It doesn't always know the context that it's working in, and this is where these issues that we're seeing really come up. The great saying that garbage in, garbage out is if the AI doesn't know what it's doing fully, then it's going to build something to answer your question and answer what you want, but not necessarily build it for the purpose you need. And that also means that it fails at performance at scale. So if you, let's take a weather app, for example, ask Claude to build a weather app. It will build it with the intention that you're going to be the only person using this weather app. So it'll build something that makes an API call to a weather API and get that back. But the weather doesn't change that often. So it'll build this, and then you push this app out to 5,000 users. And suddenly you have 5,000 people all sending an individual API request just to get something that hasn't changed in the last 30 minutes. So it doesn't understand that it's built something that's going to be rolled out to 5,000 users. And we've noticed this with vibe coding, is that people are building apps that they're telling it that it should do this, but not optimizing it for scale at all, because AI doesn't know it's in a production environment or in a production code base. And also, it kind of sucks at security sometimes. It's very keen on bypassing things to get things working, and happily will look past correct auth flows, correct guidelines. It doesn't know about compliance fully, and it doesn't know the environment that it's operating in or where your software will eventually be running. So this creates a gap. This creates a gap between proof of concept, which has always existed, and demos, where you can now have something in a very short period of time, but that code is not going to necessarily work perfectly in your production environment. Vibe-coded apps are great for a POC. They're brilliant. You can quickly trial and error, build them, and find out what's wrong very quickly and get it sorted very quickly. But that's not the case with a production code base, as I'm sure all of you are very familiar with. Production code bases need to be structured and scalable. It needs to be something where you have it governed by compliance, regulations, and scalability to make sure that your users, wherever they are able to access your application and not just encounter random error messages because Claude didn't know what it was doing. This also comes with a lot of things like observability and monitoring for production code bases, which isn't going to be the case for a demo, but is very difficult sometimes for an AI to implement because it doesn't know the full scope of your application. So it's brilliant in production because you can have all this observability, but AI needs to know that this stuff is needed for your application, and a lot of people don't provide that information. So there's a huge human driver here that's still necessary and will be forever. Things like handling edge cases, the 20% of stuff that takes up 80% of the time for you to build in your application, where someone might try and pass some weird value through, and your validation needs to catch it. AI isn't going to expect someone to do that because it doesn't understand what people might try. So it doesn't know that it needs to lock down a lot of things for production, because your proof of concept demo probably is just going to be on the happy path the entire time. So at Options, I run Private Mind's development, and Private Mind is a full deployment pipeline for privatized artificial intelligence, from the whole hardware to the interface, API gateways, everything. Basically, we build a full system out in a full managed data center location for our clients so that they know that their data isn't going off to a closed source provider. This means it's not getting retrained, it's not being pumped into any models that are going to be providing data leakage, and not having their data basically go into other people's hands. So We're 5 days into March, we've generated 50 million tokens in the last 5 days through Private Minds API Gateway for developers internally and externally, as well as also using full open source LLMs and locking them all down to our private network, which we've been doing for 30 years, not on the LLM side, but the private network side. As well as dedicated compute and storage. This is our business. We've been an IT infrastructure provider for 30 years. So this is what we do best, and it's just adapting it to this new technology era. So the fundamental change here is that AI isn't going to just replace this era, this industry. Without AI, this used to take a lot longer to make an app, though. Suddenly, you don't need to make a full boilerplate setup of your code base. You don't need to set up all your config files and your project files and make sure that everything is exactly perfect. Usually, that is a couple commands and then a few tweaks here and there to make sure that it runs properly. And it's, whoa, significantly easier to do now with artificial intelligence. So the logic has changed, and you can see that we don't even really have any stress on the boilerplate setup side now. But you go straight into the core logic, which is where the actual building of your application lies and the real value comes for the user. But you can see that there's a way bigger step now for reviewing and validating this code that is generated by AI, and this is where things really fall flat for production industries, people who aren't reviewing their code that an AI is generating. Because it does dramatically speed up tasks, but is it doing it correctly, and would it have actually taken less time to just do it yourself because you know it would have been right, instead of having it speed through a task and then have to meticulously rewrite everything that it's messed up on. So this is a question I want people to think about for a little bit. Feel free to grab me after if you have a really good answer to this or just want to talk about it, because I'm very keen to hear the thoughts of the room. Do you think that AI is actually adding quality to your dev work or your team, or is it just speeding things up? Because by the time it makes it to production, is it worth all that review process rather than having just done it manually? So here's a few things I'd recommend to bring back to your team from at least this talk. Is that it will really speed things up. AI is a very powerful accelerator for this industry, but it isn't just going to get rid of development as a whole and software engineering. But the handoff to production will always be focused on humans. That shouldn't be offloaded to a robot at any point. And AI should change the effort that you make, but not completely skip over the idea of thinking and putting effort into a project. And always ask, is it actually adding quality, or is it just speeding up my life and then making my life more difficult in the future? Thank you very much.